Greetings. I'll try and keep this succinct and cut the waffle. What it is talking you through a plan, and it will go with a Word document in which you can fill in the gaps if that's the sort of thing that you want to do for your plan. Some people get vertigo if they've just got a kind of a blank sheet of paper. Obviously, the video log is a commonplace of movies set in the future. And there's something about it that naturally creates a drama and a sense of occasion. So what I'd urge you to do, and I know it's difficult because it's hard to get started on these little video PowerPoints, is to really be ready so you can hit the ground running and create that sense of occasion. Certainly it can be helpful if you've got your what's going to be in the background set up. Some of you did that really well, by the way, in your Flipgrids. And the other thing that can be helpful is, maybe a little bit about your own attire. Are you leaning into the camera to create that sense of urgency? A hook can work really well. Everything that we'd feared about the mission had come true, and we were temporarily dumbfounded. We kind of think, where are we? What's going on? But before you get to that point, I think you've got to, and I'm repeating what I said on the other PowerPoint, is you just got to think about, well, what's your purpose here? Who are you? What's the mission been? What's the drama? What's the sense of urgency? And then you're ready to click record. Think about the backstory. Now, if you wanted to do something very tight and close to Interstellar, there are some opportunities there. Dr. Amelia Brand, for instance, seems to have a different mission from Cooper. She seems to be more wrapped up in what the heck, those first scientists were doing, Miller and Edmonds, I think they were called, working for her father, who's a professor, trying to solve some kind of relativity issue about, getting across space without using up too much time. I don't totally understand it, but getting this kind of orange box with a kind of rubber tube attached to it seemed to be so important to her. And so you probably, once you've introduced yourself, want to talk about, well, what the mission was, what was going on, what was happening on Earth, why did you think that getting up there to get this scientific data was so important? I think they were looking for habitable planets, that, this was apparently really good data that was being sent by the first wave of scientists. So she's got to kind of save the planet vibe going on. I think there's some critique here. What's the planet being saved from? Why were things so desperate? We've got the idea in Interstellar that there was such a terrible dust bowl that there was really no alternative but to kind of jump into the lifeboats and look for other colonies. These references back to Earth, of course, create an intrigue naturally for the real listener, who is us, who is on Earth at the moment. Consider plotting, consider the power in this kind of context of using one of the primal myths or stories that always works. Who's your shadow self? Amelia Brand thinks that she's a wonderful person, but she causes absolute chaos in the lives of Coop, the other guy who's left on the ship to age for 23 years and looks a lonely shell of his former self. What was his backstory, by the way? The Frankenstein monster creation comes to mind. Story of the prodigal son, Romeo and Juliet. The primal myths always work well. All you've got to do is keep dressing them up in new clothes. Once you've done your backstory, pivot to the inner world, and this is where probably there's a greater degree of subtlety needed to show the inside of your character. Don't worry about how you're going to do that. Just steal the idea of a rhetorical question if you want to get that pivot or subheading happening. So if it's Brand, she might say, well, now that I feel, Cooper's forgiveness and his fingers literally brushing the tears away, I no longer have to function under the illusion that I'm the savior of humanity. And I know that every day I will feel this terrible weight of guilt and shame. So what have I learned now that my noble intentions have been exposed as fraud? That kind of rhetorical question allows you to shift inward and examine inner space. Obviously, there are things that you've seen and experienced which are available to you in space. Space is very big, and you can kind of project and look more deeply into the human self in this kind of context. Very quiet, I'd say, social distancing times by an exponentially large factor. Still want to come back to that basis of the five sense details. A lot of things would be missed and not there in space. Maybe the smell of an orange or frying onions, things that you dream of and remember, haunt you even. Use this setting, of course, to both dramatize your inner life, but props can be really helpful there. Things like a photo or a letter, and you could even read from part of a letter. That kind of library I shunted out your way last week probably shows you the power of that kind of thing. If you were to pick up and read something of what your mom or your father or whatever it is had left for you before you took the world-saving mission. There, at the bottom, I've even suggested use a snatch of a song or a poem. As I was a kid and I grew up, I loved listening to the Yellow Song and How the Stars Shine for You, and I thought that meant I had a particular destiny, and now I've been disabused of that. Still kind of using the brand example a little bit. I missed out, and I'll put it in the planning sheet. There's another trick that you can use, which is to put three M's into your work: mood, morality, and memory. And I'll stick that into the plan. But then you're going to come to the conclusion. And this is where you probably want to go back out again to the listener and leave some final message. Inevitably, there'll be an elegiac tone, a tone of saying goodbye. I've put a very cheery example there. By the time you receive this, of course, I'll be dead. There could be scope for some philosophical or poetic thinking. Now that I'm at my last day, I can't help but ponder what a day is for. They're the places where we live. Even if I'd just been created for one day, I would still take that day and relish each passing second. So you can probably hear what I'm doing there. I'm just, naturally probably stepping back from the situation and being a little bit more poetic. We saw the fun that Christopher Nolan has with that poem in Interstellar. And at the very end, of course, you can have a bit of fun with some melodrama, fade to black or fade to a crackling screen. We'll create an emotional effect. So over and out for the time being.